Welcome all. Just going to take a moment of silence to get settled here together. If you're here for the Ernest and Esther Weed Memorial Lecture with Dwight Dunstan, you are in the right place. We're just going to take a moment of silence to get grounded here together, and then I'll introduce Dwight and hand things over to him. So welcome all. You are at or zooming into Beacon Hill Friends House, which is a Quaker center for learning and action, as well as a residential community of about 20 people who live according to Quaker values. My name is Jen Newman, and I'm the program director here, where I both live and work. And I'm excited to introduce you to Dwight Dunstan and our 2022 annual Ernest and Esther Weed Memorial Lecture. Ernest and Esther were longtime directors of the Friends House, and this lecture is endowed in their honor. And it features a prominent interpreter of Quakerism speaking on a topic of interest to friends in New England and beyond. For 2022, our speaker is Dwight Dunstan with the lecture, Rage Against the System, Tend Joy and Connection, Understanding Kingian Nonviolence and its intersection with the Quaker Peace Testimony. The lecture today will actually include 3 different modalities. So we'll first have a lecture from Dwight, and then Beacon Hill Friends House program fellow Eva Whitaker will come up and be in conversation with Dwight. And then we'll have time for some question and answer from the audience. And that audience includes all folks who are on site as well as on Zoom. And we'll give you more specific instructions about how that will work when that time comes. But without further ado, I would like to spend some time introducing my friend, Dwight. Dwight Dunstan is a West Philly-based facilitator, hip-hop artist, educator, and activist who has brought his creativity, care, and compassion to schools, community centers, retirement homes, festivals, and stadiums all over the country and internationally. He is a 2006 graduate of Friends Central School in Wynwood, Pennsylvania, and has worked in Quaker education for most of his adult life. Dwight is a level 2 certified Kingian nonviolence trainer, completing over 50 hours of training through the organization On Earth Peace. In addition to the lecture today, you can hear Dwight in conversation with spirit-led artist and activist on Pendle Hill's new podcast, The Seed, Conversations for Radical Hope. So we're excited to welcome Dwight and have you all here as part of the community for this lecture. We're going to enter into another brief moment of settling silence, and out of that silence, Dwight will begin.
Good afternoon, everyone. On-site folks, on Zoom folks, thank you so much, Jen, for that introduction. And I am so excited and grateful and also nervous and anxious and very hopeful this afternoon in this opportunity to share with you some of my learnings around nonviolence, how that intersects with my identity as a Quaker. And I'm thinking a lot this morning. I can't see everybody on Zoom, but I see my mother on Zoom. So shout out, so good to see you, Mama. And my intention for this afternoon, two main ones are coming to mind. One is to attempt to, or from what my own life has shown me, amplify and elevate some of these learnings around nonviolence and the Quaker peace testimony, which to me is one of the cornerstones of Quaker faith. There's many testimonies and practices and beliefs that Quakers hold, but that one to me is very resonant. So my hope and intention this morning is to be able to do that. My other intention that's coming to mind is to be able to support you all in this space, whether on-site or in Zoom, to connect with your own understandings of peace in your own life, and to begin to wrestle with or excavate the ways that it's been hard for you perhaps to live into that intention, that idea, that ideal. And to do that for ourselves, but to also do that in community and to build some understanding in community. So those are my intentions. As I mentioned, I have lots of feelings right now. And I know for myself, a thing that I want to offer myself, a soothing phrase that I would like to offer myself throughout the entirety of this time together, is that spirit is moving. That's going to be the phrase that I will continue to repeat to myself throughout our time together. Spirit is moving. There's a Bible verse that's very near and dear to my heart, that where 2 and 3 are gathered, there I am in the midst. And so I just know spirit, the equation is just activated right now because there's about 30 plus of us on site and on Zoom. So that phrase is going to be something I repeat to myself. Spirit is moving. And I see my mother here on Zoom, and this time of the year always for me kicks up a lot of different feelings, because it's the time of the year that my father passed away 11 years ago. And so I'm often thinking about him in this time. And when I think about this huge figure in my life, I think about a quality that I inherited from him. I just can't not think of that, like all the things and gifts that I learned from him. And so the quality that I inherited from my father that I'm bringing into the space today is a genuine love of people. He was a man that, as I watched him move through life, really just loved people and embodied that unapologetically, really. His friends, his family, the many young boys and men that he coached. He was a basketball coach. And so I'm bringing that quality that I very much believe I inherited from him into this space today. So those are my intentions. I share with y'all my phrase. I share with you a quality from a loved one that I'm bringing into the space. And to ground, I want to take just a moment to ask you all to, and invite you all to do those same 3 things in our time today. So we're going to take just a moment to center. Once again, we'll do a lot of centering, as much as I need. But I want you all to think about an intention you have for yourself in coming to this lecture series today. I would like everybody to think of a soothing phrase you want to offer to yourself when things get tense. And tense could mean a friend in the space says something that maybe you bump up against or bumps up against something you hold dear. Tense could mean something internally happening, like a physically, physiologically, a body, you notice something happening to you. But any phrase you want to offer yourself that would just help to soothe you. And then lastly, I want to invite in loved ones, whether they're still on this plane or not, into the space by asking you to think about a quality you've inherited from a loved one that you just want to hold with you today. So let's take a minute to just do that. So hoping that for those who opted into having some conversations with other folks that felt fruitful and generative to share some piece of you with another person, and thank you for folks on site for doing that as well. Those are going to be our anchors for today as we move through this conversation. My hope is that you all just see those intentions, phrases, the folks, the qualities as places to re-energize yourself throughout our time together. This is going to be our agenda for today. We've done some opening, some internal journaling. We're going to do one more quick prompt, and then I'm going to move pretty quickly through some what I'd say are key connecting principles of Kingian nonviolence to the Quaker peace testimony. So it might feel like really fast, but I'm also going to try to speak really intentionally during that time. After which I'll invite Eva Whitaker, dear friend and Beacon Hill Friends House staff member, to be in conversation. We're going to be in conversation with one another, and then we'll open it up to folks to ask some questions. And then I'll do a closing activity. And yes, throughout the time, if there's things that bubble up, questions that bubble up, the Q&A at the end is a great time to hold them. And sometimes, I don't know, I'll be open to spirit. If you got to interject in other ways, we might be open to that. Next thing that I just want folks to quickly, thoughtfully, intentionally reflect on is this idea of joy and connection. This lecture was titled Raging Against Systems, Tending Joy and Connection. And I want to spend just about a minute or two going back internal journaling, or if you have something to write on, to think about these ideas of joy and connection. And the prompts are to think of a time that you felt a deep sense of joy and connection in relationship, and connected to that moment, that time, if you can remember or recall the qualities and characteristics that were present in the relationship that fostered that sense of joy and connection. So the moments I think of often come with loved ones spending sweet time around dinner tables, eating food, chatting late into the night, and the characteristics that always seem to be present. There's always a lot of laughter. There's always a lot of laughter and levity in those moments. And there's always a lot of intentional listening. Like, I feel very well listened to in those moments where I feel deeply connected in relationships and deeply joyful in relationships. So think of a moment for yourself, and then think of the different aspects or things that were present in that moment that help to foster that sense of joy and connection. Just going to give folks a moment to journal and reflect on that. Thank you, everyone. We're going to come back to those. My hope is that during the Q&A, as folks have questions and responses, I might actually ask you all to share that moment of joy and connection in order, as we're building and learning. Yeah, so we can be in the moment of your question or responses together. That'll help me to root a little bit more to see how folks are coming to this idea of joy and connection. Kingian nonviolence, getting into Kingian nonviolence, which was something that came to me in 2020. The opportunity to study Kingian nonviolence came in 2020 during this time in our country and perhaps the world. We were traveling through a portal. By portal, I mean we were, as a species, being transformed, being asked to transform, being made to transform. And specifically as a culture, American culture, I feel like we were being made to both contend with, grapple with, face the realities of our histories in our country, specifically around race and racism and racial justice, while also being asked to step into new ways of being in relationship with one another that center connection, that are human-centered, which means really focused on and intentional about having this society work for everyone. We saw the ways that our society wasn't actually set up for everyone to thrive, let alone survive. And I really saw beautiful opportunities and ways that folks figured out and were creative around supporting one another to survive and thrive. And during this time in 2020, I was recommended a book by a person named Kazu Haga, who is a thinker, facilitator, activist based in the Bay Area, called Healing Resistance. And it was in this book, Healing Resistance, that I learned specifically about a frame of nonviolence known as Kingian nonviolence. Now, before that point, the other places that I had heard the word nonviolence, the only other places that I heard it, are the main source of hearing about it was through my Quaker education. I went to Quaker school and for high school. And at 14, I first came across Quakers' ideas around nonviolence. But it would be some almost 20 years after being introduced to nonviolence in the specific spiritual and activist sense that I would come to it and learn about this other sect or other relational, maybe a distant cousin or a close cousin that was used during the freedom movement in the US. And so I didn't know this at the time, but my spirit had been yearning to really understand, like, what did Quakers mean when they said the word nonviolence? What did Quakers mean when they talked about peace? And I had about 20 years to grapple with that, be in conversations about it, but it wasn't actually until 2020, and I read this book by Kazu Haga, that things started to really crystallize about what Quakers say and mean when the word peace shows up in our readings, in our meeting for worships. And so, to quickly explain Kingian nonviolence, I want to start by naming these, what we call the 4 pillars of Kingian nonviolence. The first is why Kingian nonviolence? Why do we call it Kingian nonviolence? And it's specifically not to put MLK as solely the person to reflect on, or to be amplified as the purveyor or the holder of nonviolence, but to really reclaim him and his legacy from some of the whitewashing that happens around his life. Often, while he was alive, King was actually very hated man. He was very disdained by many folks, actually across racial lines, because of some of the things that he was saying and espousing. So the idea of calling it Kingian nonviolence is to reclaim his legacy, and to also really center the idea of this framework that I'm going to introduce, specifically in an era in the United States of America. There's all kinds of nonviolence that exists in society, and specifically through religious societies, but calling it Kingian nonviolence allows us to really centers us in the history and the framework within the US. And we know there are so many other peoples that the freedom movement, which I would argue is still, the seedlings were planted in the 50s, but it's still very much alive today. But there's so many other folks. Some of my favorites are people like Bayard Rustin, Ella Baker, Septima Clark, Esau Jenkins. I imagine if I invited folks in the room to say some of their favorite civil rights leaders, other names would pop up. But those are some of the reasons why we call it Kingian nonviolence. It's the first pillar. The second pillar is that Kingian nonviolence is what is known as a philosophy and a methodology, what King and Nonviolence practitioners call the will and the skill. So it offers us these principles and these steps to actually think about how do we transform society rooted in a love ethic. Thank you, Eva, for resending me this article recently that amplified the love ethic that King actually embodied throughout his life. This idea of like, what does it mean to really love our neighbors and our enemies and really be really committed to that in a way that almost seems, antithetical or nonsensical. But to also, as King has a quote about power without love is destructive. Love without power is anemic in a short sense. And so not only thinking about loving our enemies through and through, but thinking about a strategy that actually helps to transform society, the skill part of what does it mean to actually embody this love ethic and use it to transform society. So it's a way of life and a strategy in movements. King and Nonviolence offers us an approach to conflict. We are socialized as a people, as a culture, to really be conflict avoidant. It's actually one of the things when I think about my own life, it's one of the things I actually have to contend with a lot. I'm not very skilled, or I don't like conflict, period. Generally, I like to say that as a middle child, I was a facilitator at a very early age. I only started getting paid for it in my 20s, right? You know, it was this way that I really learned to navigate conflict, was to actually be very empathetic and to listen very well and to be able to synthesize the people around me and their experiences very quickly, getting very skilled at that. But the idea of seeing conflict as a way to, as a potential transformation for the settings I was in, or seeing conflict as a way to transform society, came very much later in life. But King and Nonviolence actually there's lots of different tools that it offers to be able to do that. But that's one of the pillars that it offers an approach to conflict. And lastly, it offers an approach to thinking about organizing. So King folks, when folks think about the freedom movement and how I think of the iconic images that usually come up are like millions of people or thousands of people at a march, people crossing a bridge in Selma, people showing up in Washington, D.C. For the March on Washington. And so those were all very intentional ways that people learned to organize people and to get them in a room and to get them to point towards a similar direction and to get a society to change. And so what King and Nonviolence offers us is not only approach to thinking about conflict and getting more comfortable with conflict, but it's actually an approach to think about how do we organize people well enough to be able to see the change about bring about that justice society that our love ethic or our spirituality or our religion helps us to believe is possible. We'll talk a little bit about beloved community today as well, but how do we actually in practice make the beloved community come about? There's a story as we think about the peace testimony. There's a story, a true story that happened in the United States in 1956. It was brewing before 1956, but it finally culminated in 1956, that actually had King think about this difference between what he called negative peace and positive peace. And as being amongst friends, I'm so curious about some of the stuff we'll talk about in our conversation today. But I think there's a distinct difference that I often felt in my spiritual life, that when I came across King and Nonviolence, he crystallized in this beautiful way, this difference between negative peace and positive peace. In 1956, a woman by the name of Autherine Lucy attempted to integrate the University of Alabama at Tuscaloosa. She had been trying, actually, there were cases before she actually enrolled into the school. The NAACP stepped in while she was applying to the school. Her application was denied because she was a Black woman applying to the University of Alabama, Tuscaloosa. At that time, in 1956, between 1940 and 1960, Tuscaloosa is about an hour from Birmingham, which was known as Birmingham. There were 40 there were 40 bombings where the culprit of the bombings, was never tried, was never found. So to just put into context the volatile nature of what Alabama was like during the time that Arthur and Lucy applied to the school. But finally, her case went through. She was able to apply to the University of Alabama, Tuscaloosa. She enrolled in 1956. I believe her first day was February 3rd. By February 6th, there was a huge riot at the University of Alabama. By the week of the 8th, she was expelled. And the newspaper, the day after that she was expelled from the University of Alabama, printed, "Things are quiet in Tuscaloosa today. There is peace on the campus of the University of Alabama." Martin Luther King sees this, is tracking this experience, and sees this article, or sees the experience. I imagine sees this article. I actually don't know if he read this, but is immediately ignited to write an article called "When Peace Becomes Obnoxious." So incensed by the very fact that peace had been co-opted to justify this extreme form of racism. But he comes out with this article later in the year, but absolutely influenced by Arthur and Lucy's experience. And he says, "If peace means this, I don't want peace. Peace means accepting second-class citizenship, I don't want it. If peace means keeping my mouth shut in the midst of injustice, I don't want it. And evil, I don't want it. If peace means complacently adjusted to a deadening status quo, I don't want peace. If peace means a willingness to be exploited economically, dominated politically, humiliated, and segregated, I don't want peace. In a passive, non-violent manner, we must revolt against this peace." It was this moment that King was making very clear for whoever would listen that there is a difference between what the newspaper in Tuscaloosa was printing, describing peace, and what he was saying was actually peace, the presence of justice. We friends might have seen this quote and been moved like I was. I got chills because I was like, that's actually not the peace that I dream of. It's actually a false peace. It's what King would call a negative peace. There's no justice in this experience of expelling a Black woman enrolling at a university. There's just no justice there. And so King sees this, King thinks about this, and it forms, among many other experiences, as well as his own education, how he begins to put into words what will become known as the will part of Kingian nonviolence. These 6 principles. These come from originally from King's book, called Stride Towards Freedom, which comes out in 1958. He mentions these, but these became the foundational principles of what we now know as Kingian nonviolence. And King didn't, there's a whole curriculum that gets created during, after King's death, by David Jensen and Bernard Lafayette Jr., who were appointed by King in many ways, but also felt moved to say, what did we learn from the freedom movement? What did we learn from these times? King was involved in at least 11 campaigns during his lifetime. Some were very successful, and we hear a lot about. There are others that we don't hear as much about, but each were these different learning moments. And Bernard Lafayette and David Jensen and many others looked to these movements and the things that King was a part of, as well as the brilliance that he and research and experience that he had, and codified his work. And so these 6 principles that we got from that time are ones that maybe folks in here have seen, but are ones that I, in just a moment, want to connect to the Quaker peace testimony, because I think there are 2 of these specifically that are really huge. But these principles say nonviolence is a way of life for courageous people. The beloved community is a framework for the future, that we should attack forces of evil and not persons doing evil. We'll come back to that. Accept suffering without retaliation for the sake of the cause to achieve the goal, which is the hardest one for me to grapple with. Avoid internal violence of the spirit as well as external physical violence, which we'll come back to. And lastly, the universe is on the side of justice. And so I want to just take a moment, as you're looking at these 6 principles, which of them do you look at and say, I can get with that? That feels cool. That feels aligned. That feels right on. And perhaps which do you feel like in your own life and own experience, or in the communities that you're a part of, which are ones that maybe you're saying to yourself, wow, that feels a little bit harder to live into, or that feels like something my community is struggling to live into? We'll just take a moment to think about that. Hold on to those reflections. The 2 principles that I feel like, as I was prepping for this talk, conversation, lecture feels so funny because I just want to rock with y'all. I just want to hang out and play music and be in convo. And also, I think some part of the Wheat lecture description was around deep Quaker. I forget the exact language, but I was like, I feel like an imposter. But like, I also, realized that that's maybe an inner critic and less of the spirit moving, because I think this is actually one of the reasons why I felt drawn to become a Quaker, was embedded in some of these learnings that I came through it through this other channel, through many channels, I guess. High school, Quaker high school, working at a Quaker school, and then this way feels huge. But it was these 2 principles that drew me to really research and think about some of the ways that peace testimony has showed up in Quaker practice over the last 400 years. And going back to a piece of writing that George Fox and others signed in a response to King Charles II in 1660. So this is almost 400 years ago. This piece of writing came up. So when I think about that, the peace testimony through the Kingian nonviolence lens, my eye first went to this idea of attack forces of evil and not persons doing evil. What does it mean to attack forces of evil and not persons doing evil? And I was drawn to this, a piece of this, the writing, a quote from the writing that George Fox and many others sent to King Charles that said that we know that wars and fightings precede the greed of humans, out of which greed the Lord hath redeemed us. And so out of the occasion of war, all bloody principles and practices, we, as to our own particulars, do utterly deny, with all outward wars and strife and fightings with outward weapons, for any end or under any pretense whatsoever. And this is our testimony to the whole world. If I was in the classroom, I would have each of us underline like words that stick out to us, words that we think really capture the whole of this quote, words that we don't agree with or want more clarity on. I want to get Eva up here, so I'm going to just keep us moving. When I read this quote and looked at this quote, and I changed some of the words ever so slightly, the word greed was replaced with lust in the original writing. And I felt like if we got into lust here, we'd be in a whole different convo. It'd just be hard to draw people back into a convo. We had to go through some other things. I had to, apologize to my mom about talking about lust on TV. It'd be a whole different conversation. But there was something about the word greed, and it's such a. I think about the way that greed shows up in my own life. What are the things that I'm afraid to let go of? What are the things I really want to hold on to? What are the ways that I don't want things to change for my own comfort and perceived safety? I actually don't think we get safer the greedier we get. But when I think of King talking about attacking forces and not people, the force in George Fox and others quote, I would say, is greed. That's a force that they were really combating against as friends, as early friends. And they knew some of the other forces, right? There were early friends were protesting war. We know that early friends were against the slave trade, against wearing things made by enslaved Africans, and so on and so forth. There's a number of things I imagine collectively we could lift up. But friends were very, very committed to, or very much knew that the king was not the necessary evil in this situation, but there were things that the king was embodying, that people in their society at the time were embodying, that were corrupting their spirits, that were corrupting their hearts. And so the peace testimony, to me, comes very alive in King's third principle around attacking forces of evil, not persons doing evil. And the last piece I'll say about the principles is this idea of avoiding internal violence of the spirit as well as external physical violence. And the same piece of writing that came from 1660, it was said that the spirit of Christ by which we are guided is not changeable, so as once to command us from a thing as evil and again to move into it. We're not about to be transformed and go back to doing wicked things. And we do certainly know and so testify to the world that the spirit of Christ, which leads us into all truth, will never move us to fight and war against any man with outward weapons, neither for the kingdom of Christ nor for the kingdom of this world. Once again, I would ask if we have more time to underline things things you don't agree with, things that are really resonating, right into the top. But this idea of outward weapons, when I came across that, I was just blown away. I was like, this is what King was talking about in terms of the external physical violence. Like, what does it mean to actually bring harm, bring weapons against one another? And physical violence, just to make very clear, I think there are we've created many ways to destroy each other physically as a species and specifically as a culture. But I also think we've become very skilled at non-physical weaponry ways of tearing each other down, gossip, slander, and so on and so forth. Just I think about all these other ways. I think about cancel culture. I think about the ways we make each other expendable. Those are violent. Those are violent as well to me. So, and I would argue outward weapons. We just figured out some really, we're very, very creative beings. And sometimes we use that creativity in nasty ways. But as King is thinking about outward violence, external violence, I just see George Fox and from his early writings, they're talking about not picking up these outward weapons to destroy one another. So the peace testimony, this whole article, in this declaration of King Charles was one of the, as I understand it, one of the key pieces to solidifying what then became known as the peace testimony. And some 400 years later, 350 plus years later, we see King and specifically practitioners of what will become Kingian nonviolence very much carrying that torch, picking up that mantle. And we know it's not by accident. For those who know Bayard Rustin in his life and how close he was to Martin Luther King, there's some people, I don't know if we could ever know these things, but there's some people who believe that he was actually the person who maybe really hammered it home how important nonviolence was going to be in the freedom movement. So having this Quaker really close to this person that was very central to the freedom movement, it makes perfect sense that we would see echoes of George Fox and Martin Luther King. This is a quote from Kazuhaga from Healing Resistance. He says that nonviolence is not about what not to do. It is about what you are going to do about the violence and injustice that we see in our own hearts, our homes, our neighborhoods, and society at large. And I just love this quote because as we think about activating the peace testimony, as I think about activating peace testimony in my own self, there becomes this very fine line of, right, like how do we actually activate and actualize this belief of there's that of God in everyone? What does that mean? What does that look like in practice? And to some extent, it means about, it feels connected to not just what we don't do with one another, but actually what we do, how we step into, really embodying and living into that practice through our relationships, through our connections, through how we use our resources, use our time, use our money, use our gifts. There's one quick, I'm prepping you, Eva, to come up and join. But there's one last tool that I want to introduce very quickly. And it was a tool that when I came across in the reading in the book and in King's writing, that I just found really profound. So this idea of how do we take how do I, as a Quaker, take this peace testimony and actually bring it into action? And it was something known as aggression and conciliation. And the basic principle is that we are often told to turn our aggression towards individuals and to be conciliatory, or what King and others called have brokenheartedness towards conditions. So the systems, the practices that are operating, that are alive in our society. So this is a picture of me. I sometimes like to do silly slides. Often we're taught to bring our aggression. So that can look like our anger. That can look like hatred. I actually think I've started to say apathy, which I actually think is a very heavy emotion that kind of gets swept under the rug as something that actually doesn't take a lot of energy. It actually takes a lot of energy to close your heart off to a group or to an individual or a group of individuals. We're often taught to turn our aggression towards individuals and to be conciliatory, have brokenheartedness towards the conditions. And what that usually looks like, it looks like individual violence when we're interpersonal violence, or violence towards a group of individuals, and having that brokenheartedness towards the conditions actually keeps things very much in place. The example that I often give is the ways that I was taught to interact with people who are experiencing homelessness or housing insecurity. There were many narratives going on around that I can recall, just like growing up in a major city. It's just something that you see, unfortunately. And there was often a sentiment that the people experienced perhaps asking for money on the streets, maybe had a drug addiction, their drug addiction, or they did it to themselves, or they didn't take control of opportunity given to them. There was a lot of actually animosity towards these individuals. Yet every year, once a year in my middle school, we would be asked to bring in cans for a food drive to give to people experiencing homelessness or housing insecurity. And it wasn't until much later in my life that I realized the contradictions in actually treating an individual with such disdain, but being asked to think about as a whole or as a society, or thinking about the condition of homelessness and through this very kind of small lens, not that it's not important that we also do those things. There's a both and there, but I was being taught two different things. What King says, what happens when we actually turn our anger? Perhaps we do have anger. Not perhaps, we do have anger. We have anger, we have rage, we have, these feelings that are very valid about the way that we see society playing out. But what happens when we actually turn them towards the conditions? So what happens when I actually think about why do we live in a society where everybody doesn't have access to food or housing? to get really angry and upset about that, and to actually turn my brokenheartedness towards the individuals that I interact with, what King called agape love, unconditional love, that we actually flip this paradigm on its head of we flip the paradigm on its head of what to do with that aggression that naturally comes with being humans, being alive. And we create an opportunity for change to actually come about. I think most of our movements at their core, I think rage and anger are an important driver, but I actually think love is the most sustainable driver. And so King said through nonviolent leadership, we can actually flip this paradigm on its head. And through the strategy, through the skills, learned through that were learned through experience in the freedom movement, we can actually bring about the justice that we dream of, bring about the beloved community that we envision, and do it in a way that is just, that supports all people to step into that vision. And he said nonviolent leadership was a way. I added Quaker leadership to this because I do really think about how my Quakers, in using this tool, this skill, and thinking about the peace testimony, bring this into our own places of worship, our own systems and experiences. And so I want to invite Eva up to be in conversation. Maybe we're in convo, Eva, for maybe about 15 minutes or so, and because I want to save a little bit of room for Q&A. But the questions that I want to just invite folks to think about are these. As we're talking, I think about the peace testimony, and what supports us to live fully into those moments, into the peace testimony. What might you feel be a challenge to living into that testimony in this time in your life? And maybe how is Spirit, God, the divine, asking you to deepen your commitment to the peace testimony in this time? So.
Hi.
Hey.
Hi. Oh, thank you for being here and for all that you are and all that you're bringing to us today. Thank you. I just want to take one more breath to hold that because we're moving through a lot, holding a lot. Just deeply grateful for you. And it's funny, in preparing for this conversation, there were a number of times, and we've talked about this a lot, that we could talk about so many different things for hours and hours and hours and days and days. And it's really special to be in this space with you and to accompany you as you're bringing all that you are today. So much has come up. So much has come up, and what I'm continuing to hear and what I want to bring up first is this move from, to give some context, Dwight and I are in a program right now through New England Yearly Meeting called Nurturing Faithfulness, which is very much about spiritual deepening and a lot of spiritual education around Quaker practice. And when we were recently at Woman Hill for a retreat for this program, friend Marcel Martin was telling us a little bit about spiritual movements in Quaker faith. And one of those movements is from head to heart. We're talking about from head to body. And we've been talking a little bit about and hearing the other night from friends, Diego Navarro from Pacific Yearly Meeting, about how for many people, Quakerism can be something that's intellectualized, that's in the mind. And how do we move it back to the body? How do we move it back to the heart? And I'm hearing so much this when we've been in conversation around spirituality, this need for an experience of an embodied spirituality. And when you're speaking to Kingian nonviolence, nonviolence is a way of being in the world, of moving through the world, an embodied practice. And when we're thinking about that movement from head to heart, both spiritually and the way that we're raging against systems and tending community, what rises for you there?
It's great to see you. See you. Yeah. And yeah, I feel also, I'm just so grateful for this. I'm like slowing down again. I've like looked out in the audience a few times, and it's such a blessing to be able to be in the space and to be in conversation with you, Eva. And yeah, I feel like there's like this might end at 3, but friends can stay long. We probably be rapping for like the next 3 hours. What comes to mind to me, and we were talking a little bit about this yesterday. There's some quote around like the longest road is between the head and the heart. Has anybody ever heard this statement? And I don't know if I was joking. I'm a hip hop artist, so we're always remixing things. So I don't know who came up with this, or if I did, or if it was part of the collective consciousness. But I'm like, the second longest road is between the heart and the hand, right? So between the heart, like what we actually believe is true, and like putting stuff into work and like putting our hands in the dirt, like getting dirty, doing the action. And James Baldwin has a quote in The Fire Next Time: to act is to be committed, and to be committed is to be in danger. So I think when you drop down from your head to your heart, there's almost like there's almost like things get a little bit more riskier. And then when you move from your heart to your hands, like the risk is even like the risk is out there in the world. And there were many times, and it makes me emotional to say this because I'm thinking about how many people were assassinated in the 60s, how many people are put in harm's way today in 2022. And so to go from intellectual, and I'm gonna look all around, my body's gonna move because I just feel like the energy is just gonna move. Like I'm like looking out there, spirit is moving. I think there's a way that when you know something, and Baldwin also talked about this, like people rarely act on what they like. Basically, he's like, people know right from wrong, but people rarely act on what they know is right, because of that risk that it puts you in. I think when I think about dropping down, it's just scary to drop from the head to the heart. It's actually, you just feel it in a different way, and you're actually called, I believe, by whatever source you believe in, to actually act when you drop down from the head to the heart. And so at Nurturing Faithfulness, we're having these conversations about the head to the heart, and we're about dropping down, and then maybe from the heart to the hand. And I think, it just becomes, it's risky. It's a risk. And I think what we're actually asking for, and we've had this convo, there's people in this room or people on Zoom that I've had this convo with, but to ask someone to take a risk with you is much different than asking someone, will I be safe? Or can you promise me safety here? Right. I think it's a much different question when we drop from the head to the heart and the heart to the hand. that fall is it's not a safe. I actually can't promise you you'll be safe, but I can promise you that we'll be in it together. We'll move together, and people they would have to prep themselves. There's 6 steps that I didn't get into today, but one of the that go along with Kenyan nonviolence, and one of the step is known as self-commitment, which originally was named self-purification. Like, how do I get my mind, body, and spirit ready to go die?
Right. Oof.
And that's a different level. That's a different level. And so, and people would do that to, like, what would it mean to do that together? To be like, we're going to prep ourselves, to risk this thing together. So that's my mind goes to, like, all of those things. And everybody's not going to, I don't think everybody is called to take that risk. I actually don't think everybody is called to take that risk, but it does matter that it does matter that we know where we're connected as we think about dropping down. That's coming to mind. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Yeah, just bring up again, we were deep in conversation around this yesterday, but thinking about taking risks together and putting ourselves in places where we are letting go of comfort, right? However we experience that to me is connected to, and we talked about this yesterday, grief and vulnerability, and how we see those things and how you might experience those things to be really integral to this process of both raging against systems, tapping into that anger and movement and action, and the importance of relationship building, tending to community, visioning for our future. Where in all of that, where do you see grief to be and vulnerability to be?
Thank you, Jen. What I'm being called to think about for this podcast that I'm blessed to get to host, I was in conversation with Reverend Retta Morgan, who talks about, like, our hearts being able to break in 2 different ways. Like, they can shatter into a million pieces, and they can break open. And when heart breaks open, so much more possible. Like, there's just so much more possible. There's so much transformation. There's so much, and there's, even though the self purification, the self commitment that they were doing during that time was around life and death, physical life and death. I think about the ways that, right, we're all, and I think about George Fox's quote around greed, right? I think that word, I would want to dissect that and really open it up, and because you just mentioned around, like, comfort, right? I think there's something, when I think about grief and vulnerability, it is essential to, I would argue, and Retta has helped to plant the seed in my head as well, essential to the evolution of our and survival of our species, is actually getting really comfortable with grief and vulnerability. I actually don't think we get through this portal. We're not through this portal. We're like, I don't know, we're like twirling around in it, you know, like, right, we're twirling around. Sometimes the music is good, sometimes it's not so good, sometimes the hors d'oeuvres are great, you know. It's like we're like in this liminal party. And I actually think we're being called to get very close with grief and vulnerability. I think I am. And I would be curious if other people in this room have also felt themselves being asked to grieve more or be more vulnerable in this time. Exactly. It's why we're here. And so, yeah, when I think about the peace testimony and actually doing something like bringing about the beloved community, which I don't think is absent of conflict.
Not in any way, yeah.
But I think, yeah, it has the presence of justice all up in it. And I do think we're going to need to be very close with our intimate with our own grief, like our own heartbreak, our own brokenheartedness, right? And I think that requires me showing you, or me expressing to you, or bringing to your attention, like those tender places, those tender parts of me. And actually the status quo in our society, injustice, I think actually is propped up by many things, but one of the things it depends on is me never actually being vulnerable with you, or me never actually showing you my heart, or what I, like showing you my tender parts, my sweet parts. It's go, please. We're not given the tools. Right?
We're not given the tools to hold those hard things.
Or
know how to express them to each other.
No.
And you're right. It's essential. It's essential, and it's what we're called to. And just you mentioning beloved community. Unfortunately, we only have a few more minutes of this conversation. I know it's going to go on for much longer, but in this virtual space, in this on-site meeting room space, I would love to hear more of what rises for you when you think about beloved community, what that holds for you, what action, practice, transformation beloved community calls us to, and how you think about that. And the future of Quakerism.
And the future, you just slipped that in, right? Right. I didn't cheat in prepping for this, but I watched the Quaker Speak video on, I was like, what are some other friends saying about beloved community? Because
what'd you hear?
I heard so many things. And this to me, and it's connected to what the future of Quakerism, or what I think about it. And we heard Diego Navarro say some of his own thoughts on it the other day for our residency. So some of the language that comes to mind because Quakerism is inherently, or at its core, a Christian faith, but it also feels beyond that too. So I think of there's lots of language about the kingdom of heaven, right? And heaven on earth, what is that? That's what I think about when I think of beloved community. What does that look like? What does that feel like? And once again, I don't think it's the absence of conflict. I don't think it's that. That feels too easy. And I actually think, if we're two or three are gathered, God is in the midst, and we're all, we're coming from different walks of life. The conflict is just there, I think it, in studying King and Nonviolence, conflict as part of the transformation. I'm God lives in the, God lives in the conflict, for sure. So the beloved community looks like, some part of it looks like joyful conflict. Some part of it looks like I talk a lot with dear ones about what does it mean to feel in my body? Like, what does my most pleasurable self feel like,
Right.
like in my body? And I think about each of the people in this room on site and on Zoom, like knowing what that is for themselves, like what that most pleasure-filled state feels like, and being able to move in space with one another from that pleasure-filled space. And it's and to see what happened, and like, I can't, that's what comes to mind today, and it's like, it feels far away because there's so much that we there's so many formalities by being in space together, but there's histories, there's experiences, there's socializations, like we're bringing all of that to this moment. Me being nervous in the space had less to do with like what I know, because I'm like, I know the stuff, and had a lot more to do with like, what's it like, just for me, like to be a Black male person up here, and some of that are being growing up, how I grew up or where I grew up, and all these other experiences. It had more to do with that, my fear. And so I think about, like, if I take off my shoes right now, I'm like, this is like a pleasure filled, now I'm like more in my now I'm more in my pleasure filled space, and I think about the beloved community looking like each of us knowing for ourselves what it feels like to be in that space for ourselves first, and then moving in space with one another. And yeah, that requires self-work and relational work and ancestral work and like visionary work. It requires all of those things.
All of those things. And that's the place from which we and the place from which we move into vulnerability and relationship.
Everything, right. There's grieving in the beloved community. There's grief. I don't think, right. And there's grief there.
Right.
And there's I think there has to be, and because as Anne prayed over us this morning, like there's wisdom in the grief, I think about, there's grief and there's like resource, and I don't think people are freaked out by the grief.
No.
I think we're a culture that's socialized as a general culture. I think there are some sects or parts of our society or specific religions or spiritualities. I think about my Jewish family members all the time, like sitting Shiva, is just like profound to me. I didn't grow up, being able to sit for much time, or learning that when you're in grief, like people come visit you, and that you put you at the center,
Wow.
My dad passed away on a Friday. I think I was back at school on Monday, and because no one told me to go back in my family, but there was something in me was like, I don't have time to sit down and really be in grief,
Wow.
all my socializations, being male, all those things. And I'm like, wow, what would have, so I think different people know how to grieve well. And I think of how might we learn to grieve well together.
From each other.
From each other as part of our beloved community too.
Oof. Wow. I just want to take a minute in this space, virtual, here in this meeting room, to just take a few breaths to hold all of what's been brought here today. Thank you, Dwight. And now, I would love, and I believe Dwight would love too, to invite some questions if folks have them, both on site, on Zoom. The way it's going to work is that if you have a question, if you feel led, to speak into this space, if you're on site, raise your physical hand. If you're on Zoom, raise your virtual hand, and I will recognize you. And so we'll have a little bit of time for that.
Maybe we can, if there's questions, maybe we can do them in like threes. Like maybe we'll
Okay.
take 3 questions and I'll try and respond to them all so we can get as many as we can.
Okay, great. Thank you for that. Let's see how many we get. Okay, Lahari. I'm gonna bring you the mic.
Well, my question has to do with like the politics of nonviolence and how often it plays into like respectability politics and stuff like that, and how in order to have beloved community and to keep these forces in check and like have righteous anger, how can we keep ourselves from also being equitable to the people around us, and how can we make sure that we're not controlling the way that people are angry?
Beautiful,
Thank
beautiful
you for
question.
that, Lahari.
Maybe we'll take 2 more.
Down the stairs. Connor.
Thank you so much for your words and the time. I'm wondering how you think about sort of Kingian nonviolence and patriarchy and masculinity and just what your thoughts are on all of that.
Do we have a third? You want to cap it at 2?
We can get 1 more if there is.
Or 1 more? Totally fine if not.
I can answer those. Okay.
Yeah, you want to.
I'd like to ask a tough one here. I think in our system of hierarchy, which is part of our violent culture, it's really easy to do lectures and words and stay in our heads. And you've done some very good centering activities and breakouts to get us to the heart. So we've done better, much better than average here. But we're missing the hands in this situation. And I'm wondering, as far as this relates to the future of Quakerism and beloved community, how can we work harder getting from anytime we have these wonderful sharings, how can we get to the hands, which does relate to beloved community? So sorry, that's sort of a lot in one.
No, thank you, Susan. Thank you.
Cool. Thank you for those. You're not gonna sit with me no more. You're just gonna have me up here with these questions. So
I'm with you. We're holding it together. We're holding it together.
Thank you.
I'm here. I'm here.
Thank you for these questions. Yeah, the politics of nonviolence and not policing the way people feel or show anger. It's a beautiful question. I don't think I talk about. I don't know if Sophie, are you on? I don't know if Sophie's here right now, but maybe Toby is. My love life partner, Sophie Sarkar, who's a person that I have lots of conversations like these. I just really feel her presence and her support and backing, and we just grapple with. I'm like, how do I frame that relationship and not put all our business on the line, right? And also answer your question. But it's a cross-racial, cross-gendered relationship, amongst other things. And we talk a lot about, she's an Asian heritage woman. I'm a Black American man. And we talk a lot about how we've been socialized to emote, to emote. And when I really think about the times I've really been able to be angry in my, like really angry and rageful, I don't, in public, I don't think I can, it's like on no hands, that I actually am able to show, all of the heart, and it's brokenheartedness, it's disappointment, it's hopelessness, it underneath it, the rage is all of these things. But thank you, Zoji Rushi, for letting us know you're warm. That's right. I'm hot. I'll be hot like the Zojirushi. I'll be hot like the water. And so I think about the ways that before I think about police, like how we police other people, like the politics of it, you know, my question for you, or for for you, because you know, but anybody would be like, when have you been able to be rageful today? You know, have you been able to be brokenhearted today? I think what your question makes me think about is the ways our culture is actually not very skilled or has enough just have enough experience to actually deal with one another rage. It's actually not about the control is actually about a fear of, it's about a few things, but it is about the fear of what might happen if you get really angry. I imagine you got some things to be angry about. You might get really angry. Oh shoot, like what would, if you're really angry, am I gonna be hurt? Are you gonna, like, I got this nice thing over here, are you gonna, you know, do something to my nice thing? Or you know, it's, we kind of get into those questions. And I think we saw this in 2020 when lots of things were, there was lots of things happening, especially in terms of like destruction of public property, and people had lots of feelings about like, wow, why is this thing? And it's why are we taking out, or why are these people specifically, why are Black people taking out their anger on this Target, you know, on this Walmart? And I think there was like a big piece of the conversation missing from those times, generally in the public. Some people knew it, some people were having on the internet, all that, but most people weren't being like, why are people like, why would this person have, or what might be the source of this person's rage? Or actually, how might I sit with this person with, or understand or have compassion for what I can imagine into this person's rage must be? If you take a person from their homeland, enslave them, put them in terrible conditions after they're out of slavery, make laws against them, tell them they're not worth anything for hundreds of years, and then a target for 400 years, and then tell them, you know, and let's see a target get burnt. That's just a minuscule of what I imagine that person, me, you can put me there too. You don't even have to imagine them, what they might be feeling. So the question, I think it's around like our actual fear of sitting in the fire with a loved one, you know, with actually our own rage and heartbreak. I don't think we're actually very skilled at doing that for ourselves, like creating the spaces for ourselves to feel as angry as we actually want to feel. And I don't got all the answers, but you know, I do like to think I've cultivated some ways to really think about that and move into that. And that's, you know, kind of to your question about patriarchy and K and V. One of the things as I think about anger, you know, and as a person who was socialized male, like I think about all of the destructive ways I've actually been told to manifest my anger or show my anger or like show any emotion. And so where K and V like softens me, and back to the article you sent me, is King had this love ethic, right? What is this? Like, it takes a really soft person, tender, open-hearted, compassionate person to love. And as a man, I was told that the softness, compassion, tenderness is for the woman or for this femme person, for my mother, you know? And so it's a contradiction for me to actually embody Kingian nonviolence as a man, because I'm actually reclaiming this part of me. As a human, I'm set up pretty well to love anybody.
Yeah.
Society banks on me, this society, culture, banks on me not really learning to love. Right. You know, not really learning to be tender. And so in choosing to be a Kingian nonviolence practitioner, I don't always think about this. I love that question, but it's the antidote to some extent to you know, patriarchy or toxic masculinity, because it's you have to be soft to practice this. And King was very clear, like, this ain't weak, you know. I think there's like some beautiful, Bernard Lafayette told this beautiful story and I think in Chicago, or in Selma, they actually brought Chicago former, or maybe current, Chicago gang members to be some of the marshals during the Selma protests, which to like, I think to introduce, I'm imagining to introduce them to this other way of being in relationship, to their society. And I remember another story he told about like somebody getting some feedback from somebody who was like, that nonviolence BS that's nothing. And maybe Bernard Lafayette saying, you want to know what's real tough? Yeah. Like, come over to the nonviolent side, you know, like kind of like, you want to know what's like really being tough? Like love. Yeah. That is, you know, that's the toughest you can be, is like love, you know? So the question about, that's what I think about when I think about patriarchy and king and nonviolence. I'm like, I'm the toughest man there is because I love you, you know? And I feel that in my, like, you actually can't break, you know, hard things break. There's lots of images around water, but like, if I'm so soft, you can't actually break me if I just tell you, you know, if I love you. I'm so soft. I'm I can fit anywhere. You know, I can bounce back from anything. And yeah, from, you know, what, Susan, that was a trick question. It's like, what do we do? What do we do? What do we do? It's like, what do you do? You know, what do you have to do? What are you being called to do? And everybody in this room has to answer that for themselves, and answer for themselves first. And you can be like, you might say, I don't know. And you can bring a friend in, right? Like, if that's besides saying I love you, maybe top 3 most poppin' phrases I think that could enter your lexicon, your bank, is I don't know, you know? Like, yo, I don't, just be really like, I want to take steps, but I don't know. And if you go to Susan, I bet you Susan got 3-4 things you think you could join, you know, like, you know, but like, what would it mean for us to say, like, I want to take action and I don't know how? Like that to me is the beginning of like moving from the heart to the hand, because and it's once again about the risk. Like, I actually kind of know. I think when people say that I don't know, they're actually saying I'm scared and I need help. Right. That's what it means when I say I don't know. Often, I'm scared and I need help. And so I'm asking people when I want to move from the heart to the hand, I'm like, and I say like, dang, I want to do it, but I don't know. Like, just knowing somebody's there with me and will follow me, or like, you know, think with me, or like I can share with them ideas. Like that's what I think is our heart to hand moment.
Right. We're committed to each other.
Yeah.
I'm looking to Jen to see if we have any more time. No more time. Oh my gosh. Reflect on your questions. I want to hear them all. We have a reception after this, where we can continue to be in conversation with each other. But if I'm remembering correctly, Dwight, you said you had something you wanted to close with.
Oh, I do. I did say that, didn't I?
You did. Do you want to do that? You don't have to.
Yeah. I see City. My dear friend Brian Jordan is online. Maybe he's just listening. Oh, and Jenny. Can he come off of mute or no? Or do you want to come off mute? I'm putting you on the spot, Bye Pizza Guy.
Hello, how's it going?
Hey, baby.
Hey.
So Brian and I we played music together a lot for many years. And I often have these songs that we sang in our hearts. Now I'm soft now. I'm getting teary because we've been through many journeys together. But I think would you sing a little song? Would you sing just the Could you, how you feel about that? This is so wild. This is spirit moving in real time, baby.
I would be honored always. There will never be a time I will say no to that with you.
Oh man. Oh man. Maybe I'll sing I'll do my rap verse from I Believe, and then you could just sing the chorus.
Okay, my guitar is like 10 seconds away. You want me to grab that?
You could just sing it acapulco. You
I'll
could
sing
sing
it
acapulco.
All right.
Okay. So my part of this verse, this song we used to sing goes, I know it's hard, we're earthbound, dreaming on stars, thinking that it's too far, it'll never be ours. I'm here to tell you that together love can open way to deepest regions of oceans, vastly reaching to outer space. Nothing's an obstacle, no vision unobtainable. Don't believe in impossible. Nothing will be the same with you, and nothing will be the same with us. And all it took was a little trust to see what we've been missing, to make realities from wishes. See, we get caught up in the logical and don't realize what has been possible. I believe in love, truth, and empathy, and you are guaranteed those things when you get with me. I believe these words are true because I believe in you. And then Brian will come in and sing.
I believe in you, and I believe our love can bless us all one day. Will bless us come what may. I believe in you, and I believe our love can open doors once locked, like rain can soften rock. I believe that soon they will see what we see, that they'll feel what we've dreamed. I believe, yeah, I believe in you. And I believe our love will bless us all one day. Will bless us come what may. Will bless us come what may. Love you, man.
Everyone.
You're
Thank you.
amazing.
Love you, Brian.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Brian.
Thank you, everyone, for coming.
Thank you, Dwight. Clap it out, please. Please. I want to take a moment again to just express a lot of gratitude for you all, for your presence today, for what we've all brought to this space, whatever you're carrying, whatever phrases you brought, whatever presence you wanted to bring, whatever qualities we're giving forth today. I'm grateful to you all. And I want to ask Jen, what's next? Jen, do you wanna take it away?
Welcome here. Thank you so much. Thank you both. For folks on Zoom, so this is the end. We're going to end the Zoom meeting in a few minutes, but if you put comments in the chat, we'll be able to see them on the screen. So we'll get those messages. For folks on site, give us like 2 minutes and we're going to have some cider and coffee and tea and cookies out in the St. Francis courtyard. So thank you all for joining us. And this is the end of our weed lecture.